All right, welcome to The Ultimate Why. Another session. This one's about psychological safety. Now, psychological safety seems like a big term, but it's actually the core of any great organization. Any team that you have has to have this in order to create that safety and a place where you can actually fail and you can actually succeed. Without this, neither really happens. So let's dig into this. If you've been following us at The Ultimate Why, you understand that the ultimate why, the reason why we work, is connecting with other people. We call it loving connection. So it's a group of people in an organization, usually assembled to care for another group of people that are outside of the organization. We call them your community. So you're creating a product or service that actually cares for other people. And then when we talk sometimes about that kind of connection, people get into their mind some sort of woo-woo ideas about just sentimentality. But when we talk about psychological safety, let's define that first before we dive too deep. Psychological safety means what I get in my world, I understand it clearly, it's consistent, it's truthful, I can rely on it, I feel safe. Every time I confront it, it's not going to change on me. There's no chaos there. Okay? So what it is when you can have a place where you feel safe and secure and you can come in and understand what's going to happen. There's a consistency there. There's a clarity. One of the studies that has shown is a thing called disorganized attachment. And disorganized attachment in groups and in relationships happens when you don't know what's going to happen. Now, psychologists studied this within a parent-child relationship, but it's true for any relationship. Now, a child becomes disorganized and actually very chaotic in their psychology, and they become really stressed out when they don't know what the parent is going to do. Like if one moment the parent's fine, and then the next moment the parent might be really angry and upset and do horrible things and really upset the child. So that kind of chaos of unpredictability from I'm okay to I'm not okay, and not being able to determine what makes that shift is very difficult on a child, on any relationship. That's called disorganized attachment, disorganized connection. And so that's what you want to avoid at all costs within your teams. Now you think, okay, how do I do this? And a lot of things, this is a definition of what it's not at this point. A lot of people think it's some sort of sentimentality. I just have to have like this smiley look on my face and, hi, how are you? Things are really good, aren't they? But we actually know that that's not a sincere response. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a bit, but it's not about just being nice and sweet. It's about actually connecting people with sincerity and with what is called in the psychological world, contingency. Like you don't greet a morning person in the morning with a big, hey, how you doing? Before they've had a cup of coffee and time to look at their desk and wake up. So you want to be contingent, just to, hey, acknowledge that they're there and they respect that you gave them the hey instead of the big enthusiastic hello in the morning. So that's contingent communication. So what we're talking about here is a safe place where people can speak truthfully, speak their minds, reflect who they are, reflect what's happening to them, reflect what they see out in the environment truthfully. Okay? A lot of times we call this integrity. And a lot of times integrity is confused with just not telling lies. But integrity is really, think about it, it's the truthfulness of a situation. What is being represented to others is actually what is actually going on. So when I show up with this nice fake face, hi, and it's not really what's going on, then I'm not reflecting integrity. So, and people need that in order to create this psychological safety. Psychological safety means what I get in my world, I understand it clearly, it's consistent, it's truthful, I can rely on it, I feel safe. Every time I confront it, it's not going to change on me. There's no chaos there. Okay? So how do we as team leaders start to create this, and why is this important? Well, let's delve into some of the research first. Okay? The research behind this was done by one person. I read this book recently because this has been very important to us here at The Ultimate Why. It's How to Build Safe Teams. It's done by Amy Edmondson. She's a Harvard Business School professor, PhD, and has been studying this subject for over 20 years. She came across it early in her research when she was finding out that the best teams were actually reporting more mistakes in some medical situations than the worst teams. And she was like, well, how can that be? Well, the hypothesis she had was that the bad teams were actually underreporting mistakes because they didn't feel the freedom to do so. And so the realm or the world of a psychologically unsafe environment made them to hide their mistakes. So they created a culture where things were not safe on those small teams. And this is within the same organization. You might have a team that was unsafe and another one that was safe. So it was a very curious observation that she made. And then that led her to a lifetime of actually studying this subject of like, how can that be? How can we find out how to create this psychological safety where they're free to report, hey, this didn't work, and then fix it and start making better choices and better responses. That's what makes teams succeed. And so more recently, Google had a project called Project Aristotle, okay? And they wanted to find out what makes great teams. So being a huge company and having lots of resources, they commissioned a study. And so they studied thousands of their teams to see what made the most effective team. And going into it, they kind of hypothesized it'll be the guys with the biggest degrees and the smartest people on the teams. And that really wasn't the case, ironically. The people that had the safest and most effective teams, I just gave it away, were the teams that had the highest degree of psychological safety. Okay? So psychological safety became the number one factor, according to Google, as to what made a good team. So, how do we do this? So give us the steps in making a psychologically safe team. Okay? So here are some steps. 4 steps that I think are kind of really important. So first one we mentioned a little bit earlier is connection. Okay? So there has to be some sort of, you have to be emotionally intelligent as a leader to create connection. And on a psychological realm, that's in the present. Okay? So you need to do a couple of things. You need to attune with delight. Like you have to be actually happy to see the people that you're seeing. Okay? So you got to give them some good eye contact. Say, glad you're here in some way. It can be just like I said with that non-morning person in the morning, just the nod. Somebody else who's a little bit more enthusiastic morning person, like, hey, how are you doing? How are the kids? Getting up off of your computer screen or stopping your work for long enough or getting off your phone to actually address the person that has entered into your realm. Like Ritz-Carlton had a policy of a 10-foot rule. Any kind of employee or any kind of customer that came within 10 feet, they would acknowledge that person with a smile and a greeting. So that's what I mean, attunement with delight. Like, hey, glad to see you. And you'll find that after doing that for a while, you actually are glad to see people, and that it makes your day. It elevates your mood, because when you elevate the mood of someone else, it actually affects you because of your mirror neurons. So it's kind of a nice reciprocal loop. The other thing is contingency. I mentioned that earlier as well. So being contingent in your communication helps connection. Like if you try to vibe out what the other person's feeling and be able to reflect that back. You might not be as emotionally upset or as emotionally excited as the other person, okay? You don't have to match their wavelength, but you need to say, oh, I see that you're really excited about this. I'm not quite there, but it's good. So you're trying to say, it's the emotional aspect that's important. Like they might be telling you a long story about like some tacit information, and then you need to reflect back like, wow, that sounds like you're really excited about that, or oof, it sounds like you're really upset. So you're getting the emotional message in there first. So we do that a lot when we do training about how to treat people on the outside, is match their emotional intensity first, and then start dealing with the tacit communication second. So those are things that are critical for connecting. So reviewing that's attunement with delight, and then some sort of contingent communication. So that's connecting. Okay, basics of connecting. A lot more to that, but that's the basics. So that's number 1. Number 2, clarity. Clarity. Now this was like, a revelation to me when I came across clarity as being something high in psychological safety. Because in the Myers-Briggs, I am a P, which means I like to keep my creative options open. And so other people in the world are J's in the Myers-Briggs, and they like to have their options defined. There's probably more people in the world that like to have their options defined. So even if you're in a creative mode, say, hey, I'm in a creative mode and this is ill-defined at this point and I'm still toying with it, and you're welcome to define it too. So the person goes, oh, okay, I know that this is in flux. It's not, you're going to come in today and say, hey, I think this is a great idea. And then tomorrow, and you start working on it. And then next day you go, oh, I got a better idea. I do that all the time. So it's really important for me to communicate, hey, this concept is still baking in the oven here. We haven't pulled it out and said it's a cake yet. So clarity. So this is where you define the who, what, when, where, why of any kind of project or any kind of communication that you have. Okay? That kind of clarity is so important for people. And you think, wow, that doesn't feel very lovey-dovey, being clear. But as a leader, you're in a workplace. Think about this. People are being evaluated every day, and they're looking to you and going, how am I being evaluated? I was just talking to a friend yesterday who was in a situation looking at his supervisor, and he goes, so what's this about? And the supervisor goes, I think we all both really know. And there were a bunch of assumptions that were made both by the supervisor's part that her report actually knew what she was thinking. Reports aren't mind readers. The people we're working with on our teams are not mind readers. Clarity is essential. So whenever I get messages for emails from people, if the person emailing me isn't perfectly clear, I need to make sure that, hey, these are the 10 things that you need to, what are the things that I need to know? When do you need this project? How important is this project? Is there any details of this project that I need to know? All of those details I need to pull out and I need to communicate. So oftentimes I, as the supervisor, or you as the leader, need to own that information. It's critical that you be clear with your people as to what's going on, okay? So that they know how you're being evaluated. It's nothing, what you don't want to happen is when they give you the project going, oh, this isn't what I expected at all. Well, if that happens, you need to say as a leader, most of the time, you need to say, oh, I clearly failed you. I am really, really sorry. I wasn't clear on what I expected, and you just spent all this time on this, and this is great. But here's what clearly needed to be done, and this is how I failed, and how I'm sorry that I didn't clarify that. Clarity, clarity, clarity. So very simple. It takes extra time. Don't be rushing things. Every single email, every single communication, be as clear as you can be. Because in doing that, I know that I'm serving the people on my team. And then eventually I'm serving the people that we're serving as well. So clarity is so critical. So connection, clarity. Third one is candor. I've got a little slide for this, okay? Okay. This comes from Kim Smith. And she wrote a book called Radical Candor. And I thought this was a great way to look at this process, okay? There are two axes she has in this chart, caring personally and challenging directly. Now we think, oh, in order to care for people, I'll protect them from the truth. And so that is somebody who might think that they're being caring, but they're not into challenging directly at all. They don't give the information that needs to be given. And really, candor is just saying what needs to be said. And it's much better than honesty, because when we use the word honesty, we think, oh, I'm not telling any lies. Well, you're not telling any lies, but you're also withholding important information. Ruinous empathy is something where it's like, oh, I'm being so empathetic. I don't want to hurt the person's feelings. But you're withholding information that would make them a better person, okay? Or make their lives better, or someone else's lives better, okay? So there's a point where you care, but you need to also combine that with the information, the things that need to be said. And then you get actually into the manipulative insincerity. That's when people are being really obsequious, and they're just, everything's happy, and there's not even a thought for making you happy. It's like, I just don't want you to be in my world at all. So I just block you out with this, happy smiley face. That doesn't really communicate anything to the other person. It withholds a lot of truth because I don't really care about you. In fact, I might even be manipulative in that. Like, always putting on false emotions, manipulating you to feeling, lulling you into feeling okay. Okay, that's not candor. And then we got obnoxious aggression, and this is the one, frankly, I kind of struggle with sometimes, as I like truth, and I always tend to speak it. So, I will speak out truth and just be all out there with the truth. And I'm not always real considerate. So that's something I need to work on. It's like, how do I deliver that truth in a way that actually makes sure that I get into the person's, that contingency of like, hey, if I say this, I want you to receive it in a way that's not going to be hurtful to you. I'm not going to deliver critique in public in front of a bunch of other people. I'm going to wait until we have a private space where I can do that. I'm not going to make assumptions like, hey, you did this and it was wrong. I'll say, hey, let me clarify what's going on here. I saw this, but I don't think I understand the situation completely. Clarification again. And then there's radical candor. And those are some of the things that we've just been talking about. Radical candor is where you care enough to say the things that need to be said. And you do it in a way that's also caring as well. So that's what radical candor is. And she was, she worked with CEOs of Google and with Apple, and she saw this on the playing field quite a bit. So I've heard a lot about different things, and you can kind of see how radical candor is something that is so critical. So what does candor do to us? So think about this. I enter into a situation and I'm dealing with people and they're being either ruinously empathetic or manipulatively insincere, and they don't tell me that there's something wrong until my 3-month report. Okay, so my 3-month report finally comes around, my progress meeting with my staff member or with my supervisor, and suddenly all these things come out that hey, you didn't do this right, you didn't do that right, and like for 3 months you haven't told me. So what do? I pull out my mental notebook and like, never trust that smile on that face again. Always be suspicious of that person because they don't really tell me the truth. So whenever I enter into that situation, it's be psychologically unsafe unless there's candor. Because without that candor, I'm always guessing, when's the other shoe going to drop? When's this going to actually pan out to be something good, or is it? I don't even know if it's good. I don't even know if we're on the same page today. So keep your accounts short, say what needs to be said, and say it in a kind way that's going to be contingent, considering the other person. They'll notice how you say something. So I know another person who's working with a supervisor who's saying a lot of truthful things, but doing it in a way in front of others and in situations that are causing issues. Making everyone anxious. The whole team is anxious, and they all huddle together afterwards going, did you see that? Did you hear that? And they can try to console each other because there's not safety on that team, even though truth is maybe being spoken and things that need to be said are said, but they're just said in a way that's not caring. So creating safety with candor, okay, that makes the playing field very obvious to people. You see how there's kind of a theme here? It's like, make it so that all the people know exactly what's going on and they know exactly where they stand. Okay? And then the fourth one is consistency. So connection, clarity, candor, consistency. A lot of C's there, huh? So consistency is something that we're going to want to be effective in. So that's making promises and making these things into habits as well. When we habituize what we do, then it becomes routine. Okay, so when you kind of critique yourself and look at like, oh, I'm not doing that so well. Like I struggle over here in this quadrant a little bit. So I need to create, like, what do I need to do to make sure that I'm not stepping on myself with this? And create a habit that says like, hey, how am I going to do this? Create a process that makes, hey, we need time to debrief after every project to make sure that I got all the mistakes or I got all the challenges that we faced in that last month. So create processes, create systems, create methodologies of checklists and things like that. That'll make sure that you're constantly consistent, candored up and clear in all your communications. Okay? So those are the 4 core elements. And we put this under emotional engagement in our team development at the Ultimate Why. You think, emotional engagement? How does, that doesn't feel very touchy-feely, candor, connection, and, clarity and consistency. But this is like the baseline, the foundation. It's so critical that you establish that baseline where people can trust and rely on, have that consistency, that stress and that cortisol goes way down in the individual when they know, when they can come into a situation that, like, I know that there's nothing wrong, because if there was something wrong, my supervisor or somebody in my team would tell me in a way that would be contingent and kind, and I would know, and we'd be able to make corrections. Okay, so this allows for learning and development and all sorts of great things. And so let's look at another dynamic here that's important in this situation. There's another researcher named Dr. Gabor Mate. He puts this continuum between authenticity and attachment. Now, attachment is that loving connection that we've been talking about, that psychologists find is the bedrock, it's the motivator for all human beings. It's our fundamental wiring. We all need and want attachment. In fact, children without attachment, they die. So attachment is hugely important. So what we all seek that. We seek attachment before we seek anything else in life. Okay? So if we're primarily seeking attachment, we also have this issue of authenticity. Who am I? How am I feeling? What's going on in life? Those are the things that we're looking for. So we've got attachment. I want to be accepted by those around me. And then authenticity. I'm feeling something and I need to be able to communicate that. So oftentimes what happens is we'll compromise our authenticity in order to achieve attachment. So it was a really brilliant insight on his part. So what needs to happen is we need to be able to be both authentically ourselves and be able to report what's going on inside of us, how we're feeling, how we're reacting, what's going on about us, because that's important. Or else what happens when you're not authentic? He wrote a book about The Body Says No, is that all that anger, all that frustration, all that cortisol that rises up in you from not being authentic starts to consume your body. Actually, physical illnesses will start to manifest as a result. A lot of chronic diseases, cancers, and everything like that. Dr. Mate, who's a physical MD, actually subscribes to, or ascribes that rather, to this state of being inauthentic or lack of attachment. Okay, so those two states are really important, and that's backed up by other research into another thing called ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences that cause that kind of dissonance. So when the dissonance happens in life where I either don't feel attached or I'm not allowed to be authentic, then that crisis occurs. So this is what we're trying to create. We're trying to create that parity between authenticity and attachment, and that creates emotional or psychological safety in your teams. So that's what we're trying to look for here, okay? That balance. Here's another slide that I thought was really interesting that Amy Edmondson, who wrote this book again, points out, and this is her chart, and it's another factor that I hadn't really thought of in this whole process, because I'm dyslexic. So as a dyslexic, high levels of excellence and standards, I always felt beat up by them. Quite frankly, it's like, oh, you made another spelling mistake. Well, no, duh, I'm dyslexic. But she points out that if done right, high levels of standards of excellence and high levels of psychological safety go hand in hand. And she points this out in this little chart that's and it's also backed up by her studies. It's not just something she plunked up. So if you've got high psychological safety and low levels of excellence, you end up in this sort of comfort zone where people are kind of complacent. They don't really push themselves to become anything. They're just sort of comfortable and they like the status quo. So you can see that kind of lowers the levels of candor, in that people aren't really going to be pushing themselves or each other by speaking truth and taking risks. Okay, then you get this apathy zone. This is like the worst one, or one of the worst ones, where you've got low levels of excellence and standards and low levels of psychological safety. So people are just not going to care. They're just going to be every man out for themselves, and they're going to try to take care of me, number one, and not take care of anything in the team realm or in the corporate realm. It's all about me. I don't care about anybody else because nobody cares about me. So when a culture gets into that sort of unsafe and unchallenging mode, it becomes apathetic. This is kind of where I felt as a dyslexic a lot, is in this anxiety zone. I was always held to high standards by people, which was great, but I didn't always feel this high level of psychological safety because it was about blaming. Like, oh, you made a mistake, it was your fault, instead of saying, how can we help you? Like, let's install software on your system. And eventually that's what I've done, and thank God for all those levels of software now that could help me. But there was a solution to my problem. And now I'm a writer and a speaker, and I read more books than most people because I just got around it. Okay? So I went from anxiety to this sphere because of high levels of psychological safety without diminishing my levels of standards. So I've struggled with this as a leader. So my solution to create psychological safety in my mind was to lower standards. Go, hey, it's okay. Hey, it's not that great. But that actually starts to sort of diminish into either anxiety or apathy, and then people aren't quite as engaged in life as they should be. And really, this is the safest quadrant to be in, because now I'm growing, now I'm becoming. People are speaking to me frankly and kindly, going, hey, here's another way to get even better at this. Here's another way to overcome this. So now I can say to people that are dyslexic, hey, you don't have to give up on reading. Use Audible. Listen to audiobooks. Hey, there's 26 different ways to use software to correct your spelling now. Use it and get better at it. And so all of those things are enhanced by levels of standards in a psychologically safe place. Okay? So that kind of brings us to the end of our psychological safety talk. Kind of a longer one, because this is really important, and we're actually developing this into a full workshop. So this is the critical core of the Ultimate Why workbook, which deals with teams and deals with creating culture, of course. But in the center of it all, we have what we call psychological safety and integrity. Okay, so and it is based on those connection, clarity, candor, and contingent communications. So those are all critical factors in creating psychological safety for your teams. So hope you've enjoyed this, and if you want to find out more about what the Ultimate Why is all about, we encourage you to just jump onto our website, give us a call. We'd love to speak with you about how to develop your leadership, develop your culture in a way that will create psychological safety and much, much more in your culture, so that everyone that comes to work, which is our goal, is passionate about life, excited about life, and full of joy, because like I said, we all need that authenticity and connection in our lives. And the workplace is huge for creating that. And as leaders, we have such an opportunity to help people have lives that they could feel safe in and grow in. Let's not diminish what we're doing in any way at work. This is really a calling. The what you're doing is nowhere near as important as to how you're treating people. And the why we're doing it is so that we can create that joy and that connection that every person needs, both the people that we serve and the people that are on our teams and ourselves as well. So thanks for joining me, and we hope you like and share this with your friends, and follow us on the various social media outlets that you're seeing this on. All right, thanks much. Bye.